Physician executive with 25 plus years experience. He's an expert in preventing and reversing chronic diseases. He served as medical director, Earth Saves Meals for Health. And his talk today is Avoiding Drugs, Procedures, and Disability. Sounds good to all of us. Please welcome Dr. Don Forrester.
Thanks, Bob and Daisy. First time I've ever been introduced by a Chihuahua. And thank Dixie and the Sacramento Vegan Society for having me. Been some challenges with the setup and everything. I actually drove down from Sacramento and I figured out my average speed was about 26 miles per hour, given all the slow-ups along the way. I actually wish I'd had Lanny's talk a little while ago because I could have practiced some of those things while I was sitting in traffic at the various points. Today what I'd like to do is talk to you about avoiding drugs, procedures, and disability. Michael Greger is always a difficult act to follow for a lot of reasons. Clinical Catalyst is my Federal Service trademark. And mainly my objective today is to change your beliefs about chronic disease, number one, and by changing your beliefs, change your behavior so that you'll avoid drugs, procedures, and disability. The presentation sort of has three parts. The first part is some concepts and context and definitions, so we're all talking the same language. Then we're going to get into the science behind diabetes and arterial disease at a little bit of depth. Then we're going to hit sort of a lightning round. Once we have the concept set, we're going to move on to those other topics like hearing, vision loss, dementia, autoimmune disorders, arthritis, and things like that. Then we'll circle back to weight loss. As a family medicine doc, it seems like everybody on almost everybody's list is I'd like to lose a couple pounds. It was somewhere on the list. It may not have been on the top, but it was somewhere there. And then we'll just end real quickly. I'll wrap it all up with a recommendation for you and tell you why this sort of approach works. Basically, my background, I was taught to solve problems with science as a chemical engineer, worked for a year or two at NIH before I went to medical school at Georgetown, came out for a family medicine residency out in Sacramento. I like the West Coast. I don't miss the heat, humidity, gnats, or thunderstorms. The Washington, D.C. area was a very good place to grow up. Very interesting, but I enjoy going back periodically, but I don't miss it. At Kaiser Permanente, I practiced my craft of adult medicine, some pediatrics, for about 30 years. And along the way, I held some leadership positions, including running a family medicine department of about 36 doctors, a preventive medicine program. For those of you who are old enough to remember the old multiphasic screening programs with Kaiser Permanente. And along the way, I ran a facility, Rancho Cordova, which was built on quality improvement, and I'm a graduate of the advanced training program at Intermountain Healthcare in Salt Lake. I retired actually 5 years ago. I took early retirement at age 60 and have sort of migrated into my encore career. I give up telling people I'm retired anymore. I see patients. I have a private practice where I see part-time patients on a one-time consultation up in Folsom. I am very fortunate to work for John McDougall in Santa Rosa, where twice a year I see Whole Foods patients. It's an amazing program. They come in, 8 days later they go away, and they're off 80% of their medications in just 8 days. There will be a little bit of technological challenge. I have a couple of patient clips, and they actually, with the patient testimonials, so I will hold the mic next to those little speakers there and try not to blow everybody out of the room so you can hear the actual patient testimonials of 3 of my patients. And I do some projects. I have presentations like I'm doing now. I do some writing and projects. So this gives you some context. These are the leading 10 causes of death in the United States. We're not going to talk about cancer today. Dr. Greger's talked about it a bit, but we just don't have time. But we're going to talk about cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease. The third one on the list may surprise you a little bit. It's medical care. As a trained patient safety officer, medicine has gotten so complicated that given the procedures and all the drugs we use, we actually unintentionally kill a lot of people. And that's actually preventable if you use quality improvement techniques. And just to tell you a little bit about how hazardous healthcare is, it's not all bad news. If you look down here, anesthesiology is what's called a 5.2 sigma. It's considered very safe. In other words, if we put you to sleep in this country, we'll probably wake you up, you'll be able to move your toes and all that sort of stuff, and you'll be better off. But it's not as safe as scheduled airlines. It's sort of as safe as chartered airlines. But the rest of healthcare is up here with bungee jumping and mountain climbing, basically, as far as safety is concerned. But, you know, we're all going to die. We'd like to sort of put it off. But we're talking about quality of life. You know, if you look at the numbers, the most recent numbers I have, about over 20% of adults in this country are disabled. And this is the leading causes of the top leading 10 causes of disability. Arthritis, back and spine problems, heart trouble, diabetes, hearing, stiffness and deformity of joints, vision, and stroke. We're going to touch on all those today. We're not going to talk about, I'm just going to briefly mention these two. I'm not going to delve into them. There is good studies to show that by following this approach, if you have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, your pulmonary function actually gets better and certainly doesn't deteriorate as quickly, assuming you've stopped smoking, of course. Keep smoking, that won't help. Mental health and emotional problems, there's a lot of good work, and if you look at nutritionfacts.org, Dr. Greger's website, he has things on ADHD and depression and things like that. But a lot of the problems with mental and emotional problems actually come from our inappropriate use of the psychiatric drugs for depression, for anti-anxiety drugs, and also the antipsychotics. The best book I've seen written on that was actually written by somebody who wasn't a physician, by Robert Whitaker, and it's called The Anatomy of an Epidemic. So for those of you who are interested in learning more about that, we're not going to get into that today. Everybody in this country knows we pay a lot for health care. It's been a lot of the topic recently. We are the #1 in spending. Dr. Greger said we were #1 in some other things as well. But it doesn't get us much for our money. In my opinion, I think about 80% of that, over 80% of it is avoidable. So the way to think about that from a personal basis, your health plan dues should be about 20% of what they are. Definitions: primary prevention is when you don't have a disease and you do not get it. Secondary prevention is you have a chronic disease and you cure it. Tertiary prevention is where you have a disease, you don't cure it, but you're on medications or you undergo procedures so you avoid complications. I can give you talks on tertiary prevention around drugs and procedures, but I'm not going to focus on that today. Today I'm going to focus on primary and secondary prevention. Medicine's response, the guys like me who write prescriptions, and by the way, I'm not a therapeutic nihilist. I do still write occasional prescriptions, although given my current medical practice and work with McDougall and Meals for Health, I actually take more people off medications than I put on medications. Much more rewarding way to practice. But the rest of the industry, 51% are on 1 or more drugs. Over age 65, 25% are on 5 or more medications. And an even scarier number is at under age 21, 25% of our children are on 1 medication or more that's chronic. We'll get to the surgeons in a minute. That's the medicine side of the deal. A system is a set of things, people, cells, molecules, or whatever, that are interconnected in such a way that they produce their own pattern of behavior over time. We deal with systems all the time, and there are 2 types of systems. It's important to understand the distinction between the two. A static system is something that is complicated, predictable, stable, and you can gradually improve it. An example of that is car manufacturing. For those of you who are old enough to be alive in the 1950s, made in Japan meant one thing. And somewhere along the line, made in Japan meant something very different. In the 50s, it was considered junk. Now it's anything but junk. And the person that taught the Japanese how to do all that is a guy named Dr. Deming. And he's a quality improvement expert who went over in World War II at the Army's behest to count the Japanese. And while he was over there in his spare time, he taught the emerging Japanese industries about total quality improvement, or the statistical process control application to processes or teams on front lines solving problems. However, in my end of the business, in biology, we don't deal with complicated systems. We have complicated systems, but we have what are called complex systems. Complex systems are unpredictable, they're dynamic. You can get dramatic improvement. Examples would be human metabolism. How many in the audience have read Dr. Campbell's new book, Whole? If you've read that, you get a sense for how complex things are. The thing about when you try and change adaptive systems, like I'm trying to change you today, you are a complex adaptive system, by the way. I'm trying to get you to change your behavior. And the way to do that is you use different levers. And as a practicing physician, I use these all the time. I would provide information and statistics to patients. I would tell them therapeutic metaphors or stories. I use my trusted relationship with my 2,000 patients I took care of for at least 27 years. I gave them feedback loops. Lab result would be interesting. If you have home blood pressure kits, if you have diabetes, you get feedback on a regular basis what your fasting sugar is, maybe a home blood pressure kit. You set your goals, what your personal goal is. Do you want to cure diabetes? Do you just want to control it? But the biggest lever, the most effective lever at changing your behavior is your belief system. Everybody knows that contemporary is the tipping point, when things reach the tipping point and we move into a different belief system. It was actually popularized by a guy named Kuhn, who wrote the book called The Structure of the Scientific Revolution. It was back in 1950. It's the most quoted work in the 20th century. And we get you to shift your belief systems. As you will see, it becomes a lot easier to change your behavior. So the two things you have to know about complex systems are sometimes you get unanticipated outcomes. Operation Cat Drop, 1950, there was an outbreak of malaria in Borneo. So the World Health Organization thought it would be a good idea if they sprayed DDT. So they dropped DDT, killed a lot of mosquitoes, and dropped the malaria rate. So things were looking good at this point. But the roofs of the natives' houses started collapsing. They were made out of thatch. There was an outbreak of thatch-eating caterpillars. And the reason there was an outbreak of thatch-eating caterpillars was that there was a parasitic wasp that used to keep them under control, but the DDT had killed the parasitic wasp. So now the government was furnishing metal roofs to people in Borneo, which makes it kind of hard to sleep in the tropics when you get rainstorms. In the meantime, the geckos were eating the dead insects, and the cats were eating the geckos, and the DDT buildup killed the cats. Of course, without the cats, you get an outbreak of rats. And because now that they were worried about an outbreak of typhus or Sylvanic plague, the World Health Organization authorized the British Air Force to parachute in 14,000 cats to solve the rat problems. This is an example of an unanticipated consequence. On the other hand, if you go upstream far enough in a complex system and you do things that are consistent with the design of the system, you can get dramatic results across a wide range of issues, and we're going to see that as we go along. So let's talk about diabetes. It's expensive. It affects large numbers of people. Leading cause of blindness in age 20 to 74, 44% of new cases of kidney failure, lower leg amputations, higher risk of heart attack and stroke. We define that now as 2 fasting blood sugars above 124. It used to be 150, but we've changed the definition. For those of you who've been around the medical profession long enough, we know we're changing the rules as we go along. This creates a lot more diabetics. We couldn't go any lower than this, so we created prediabetes about 12 years ago. And anything below 100 is now considered normal. So if you have diabetes and you cure it and you get down to a normal level, that's an example of secondary prevention. If you're in these areas and you do things to avoid becoming a diabetic, that's primary prevention, okay? But I want you to understand that this is a continuation. If you had a choice of having fasting blood sugar of 95 or 85, I'd vote for 85 every time, even though they're both normal, okay? I'm just throwing that out there for you people in the audience who have normal blood sugars who are starting to feel a little cocky, okay? Okay, here's your key belief number 1. Everybody knows diabetes is a sugar processing problem, correct? But what they don't know, most people don't know, when I give CME talks to docs, they don't know, is it's the fats in the diet that causes the diabetes, okay? And the reason this works like this is the fat gets in your bloodstream and interferes with the insulin, which is the hormone that grabs a hold of the glucose molecules and throws them in the cells so you can burn them as energy. Not only that, the fats get inside the cells, they turn off the genes that run the mitochondria that burn the sugars. Okay, so you got it? It's a fat problem that causes a sugar processing problem. Now we're going to move on to one of my second pet peeves around diabetes, the use of the term sugar. Okay, we're going to go into this for a little bit here because there's so much confusion about carbohydrates and sugar. It's unbelievable, but it's not that complicated actually. And once you get it, you're going to get it and you'll be fine with it. Glucose and fructose are very similar, simple sugars. They're 6 carbon molecules, ring structures. They are very similar. Your body treats them very, very differently. Glucose is your primary source of energy. It is burned by every cell in your body. When you have excess of it, it's stored as glycogen in your liver and muscle, and excess is stored in fat cells. When you eat it and you get it, it stimulates insulin release, which is what it's supposed to do, so the insulin can grab a hold of it and throw it into your cell. It suppresses your appetite, and on the sweetness index, it has a sweetness of 73. Okay, so let's look at fructose. Fructose is only burned by the liver. 99% of its metabolism is in the liver only. Your body treats it almost like a poison. It is not stored. The liver metabolizes it to uric acid, which raises your blood pressure and also predisposes you to gout. Cholesterol, inflammatory aldehydes, such as fructose consumption is the leading cause of cirrhosis in the society, more so than alcohol. Free fatty acids like triglycerides, which get out into the bloodstream. Remember what I said the fats in the bloodstream did? They interfere with the diabetes. Fructose is like the lowest glycemic food you can eat, and glucose is the highest. People who have diabetes think they should eat low glycemic. Well, you can feed diabetics pure glucose and their diabetes gets better if they have type 2 diabetes. We'll talk about that type 1 in a minute. But the thing about fructose is it does not suppress your appetite, and it's much sweeter than glucose. So imagine yourself a food processor and you have a substance here that doesn't suppress your appetite that's very sweet. Is it any surprise why they put this stuff in the food? Okay? Now, table sugar is really just one molecule of each one. And most high fructose corn syrup is just 60-40 or 55-45. There is some 90-40 high fructose glucose out there. But for the most part, you want to use fructose in your diet with caution. Fruits have glucose, fructose, sucrose, but they also come with some good phytochemicals and a lot of fiber. And because it comes into your body slower, your body can handle it. But people who have high cholesterols who don't get better on going on a plant-based diet sometimes have to limit their fruits. I had one gentleman I was taking care of, it was last March, he was at the McDougall Whole Foods weekend, and I'm used to doing a physical. They get 27 hours of education. They eat buffet breakfast, lunch, and dinners, have snack room availability 24/7, and I see them 8 days later, and all their numbers are just a lot better. But this one guy's triglycerides had gone from 200 to 500. And I said, what have you been eating? He says, oh, I love fruit. You know, they have big bowls of fruit all over the place. That's all he was eating was fruit for the most part. So he was overdoing it, so we had to ratchet him back a little bit. Complex carbohydrates are very good. Long chains of glucose molecules, just exactly what you need. Starches are potatoes, grains, beans. You find them in vegetables. We're basically, as John McDougall, who wrote the starch solution, he basically calls us starchivores. We evolved from the great apes. The great apes are fruit eaters for the most part. They have to live around the equator because they have to be somewhere where fruits are in season all year round. We have evolved to have increased amylase genes in both our saliva and our pancreatic secretions so we can digest starches. Amylase is the gene that breaks these things apart. We've also have a 40% increase in the volume of our small intestine compared to the great apes. So basically, we have been designed to eat starches, and then about 100,000 years ago, we invented fire so we can start cooking our starches, which allows us to more efficiently absorb cooked food. So we are basically starchivores. So if you want to cure type 2 diabetes, and 7 years ago, a friend of ours gave my wife and I a copy of the China study, and we went very quickly from being vegetarian to vegan. I was about 198 pounds at that point. I'm down to 175 7 years later. My cholesterol's plummeted. My blood pressure's gone down. I feel great. And I started recommending that to my patients, and some of them started reading it and doing better. And then 3 months later, I bumped into Neil Barnard. He came and gave a talk. He wrote a book called Neil Barnard's Program for Reversing Type 2 Diabetes. Highly recommended for those of you who have diabetes or know people with diabetes. As a busy primary care doc at Kaiser, I didn't have a lot of time to talk to patients. They were being taught the American Diabetic Association diet anyway, which tells them to count carbohydrates, which you now know is not the best way to go, correct? And I could just have them do the book. And the patients that I had that followed it actually started reversing and curing their diabetes. Then the doctors around me started having me give talks about this stuff, and I started giving talks about all the chronic diseases. But the name of the book is Neil Barnard's Program for Reversing Diabetes. I'll put a website up at the end, and you'll see the link to that. But if you look at the fats, most of the stuff that are high in fat are all animal products. Broccoli, beans, rice, and potatoes are way down here, very low in fats. You can feed diabetics nothing but rice, and they'll get better. Oils, on the other hand, are 100% fats. So fat oils like olive oil, canola oil, things like that, you want to stay away from if you're a type 2 diabetic as well, because they're fats, and they're going to make the diabetes worse, or at least get in your way of trying to get it better. So my patients started curing their type 2 diabetes. But when I was giving these talks, I came across this study which was published in 1994. I was giving talks starting in 2006. This is a remarkable study because they took 21 patients that had adult diabetes for like 12 years, and they had painful distal neuropathy for 3.5 years. These are patients I was prescribing Elavil and Tegretol to control their symptoms. They put them on a low-fat vegan diet, slightly calorie restricted, no refined sugars or meat substitutes or free fats, had them exercise 30 minutes or 2 miles, whichever they got first. In 16 days, 17 of them had eliminated their neuropathy. They had reversed one of the complications of diabetes that I didn't think you could reverse. Yes, ma'am. Right. Any oil. We'll get to coconut oil later, okay? But they're all oils, are basically fats. So the remarkable thing is these patients actually reverse their, but if you look over here, remember I talked about complex systems, if you do the right things, you get dramatic results. Their cholesterols were down, triglycerides were down, they were losing weight, their blood pressures was down, they were off 80% of their blood pressure medicines. At a 4-year follow-up, 71% were still following the program. Beyond diabetic neuropathy, here's an example of a person that reversed their diabetic retinopathy on the best diet. This result was published in late 1950s, slides courtesy of Dr. John McDougall. And you can see on this slide, you've got all this diabetic damage. And 26 months later, you can see the optic nerve has come back and a lot of the exudates, and bleeding has actually reversed. This doesn't always happen, but it can happen. That's the point. So, new beliefs around diabetes for you are it's the fats that causes the sugar problem, right? Cure is possible. Early is always better. It's better to get this stuff early than later. And you need to work with your doctor, your nurse practitioner if you're on medication, because what I do at the McDougall program and with my own patients when I'm treating them, and as director for Meals for Health for EarthSave, when people start eating correctly, if they're on a diabetic medicine that lowers their sugars can get too low. So you have to take these people off, especially the sulfonylureas like glipizide, you have to take them off that pretty quickly. And one of the tools that I found most effective is something called a run chart, which basically is your sugars on the y-axis and the days of the month on the x-axis, and you just record it every day. And don't keep it in a booklet. Those numbers in a booklet don't mean anything. That's a terrible way to look at numbers. But when you start looking at things across every day, fasting sugar in the morning, you can see trends. You can see it going up. You can see it going down. You can see when it goes below a certain point, your doctor's told you to stop your medication at that point. You can put little notations on there when you reduce your medicine or you stop your medicine. Very useful tool. Now, this is going to be an experiment. I've got a patient clip. I want you to hear from Ben Exkosian, one of my patients from Meals for Health program, and let's see how this works. The speakers are there. If we're real quiet, you might be able to hear it, but if you can't hear it, I'm going to go put this speaker in this microphone in that speaker, and hopefully, you know, whatever happens when you get microphones in the wrong place doesn't happen. Okay? Yep. Can you hear Ben? Can't hear Ben. Is there a volume on this?
And in the last 7 months or so, since I've lost about 62 pounds. completely reversed the diabetes. My waking blood sugars are generally around 75, 80 every day. I stopped taking measurements after 3 months of those readings. My life's completely changed. I have tons of energy. I feel fantastic. I can finally beat my 6-year-old in a race, which is a nice thing.
Ben, I'll tell you a little bit about Ben. He came into me, he weighed 313 pounds. The reason he came to the McDougall Whole Foods program is doctors were threatening him with insulin shots. So he came in on day one. We stopped his blood pressure medicine and we stopped his glipizide and his metformin. And his fasting sugar, when he entered the program on all that medication, was 159. He left 8 days later with a 129 fasting sugar. So it's 30 points lower off his medication. He was still diabetic. He didn't become undiabetic and normal for about 2 or 3 months, but he was heading in the right directions. His blood pressure was lower after 8 days off his lisinopril than on his lisinopril. His reflux, which he had to take 4 Tums for at bed every night, had gone away. His energy level was up, as you heard. The other point about this is not everything that's important can be measured. Beating your 6-year-old in a race is important, okay? Ben, I saw him a couple weeks ago. He helped out with the Current Meals for Health program. He's still doing well. His 2-pound per week weight loss is about what you can hope for. Ben, it was a real gym rat, so he followed the program and he was exercising a lot. But as you'll see when we get to weight loss, you can actually lose weight on a couch with a remote. So let's talk about arterial disease. Dr. Greger talked about this a bit, so we don't have to really spend as much time, so we'll be able to shortcut it a little bit. But it's expensive. If you look at just coronary artery disease, high blood pressure, heart failure, and strokes, that's alone. But there are a lot of other arterial diseases that people don't think about. Dr. Greger talked about ED, early death, right? What he didn't mention was it really doesn't care what sex you are, because female sexual dysfunction is directly in their 40s and 50s, and studies have been shown to be directly correlated with your cholesterol level. And you never hear about female sexual dysfunction talked about. So I just wanted to make sure that we move the women out of the equation as well. As a family medicine doc, I used to get a lot of back x-rays. And you look at some people's back x-rays, and you've got your vertebrae there, and you've got those little disc spaces between, and they would be narrowed. And I used to tell people, you know, that's just wear and tear. You know, we were designed to be on 4 legs, we're up on 2, so, you know, those discs are just getting worn down. There have been 2 studies out of Sweden, however, that showed that the aortas, which are your main artery that comes down the back of your body, and we'll talk about the P-Day study again in a minute, the blood flow to your vertebral bodies in your back come through the middle lumbar arteries, which come right off the back of the aorta. And if they get blocked up, the blood flow to your vertebral bodies gets worse. And the nutrition for your disc space comes from your vertebral bodies by diffusion. They don't have an isolated blood supply. So narrow discs are actually a sign of arterial disease. We've also got periodontal disease, macular degeneration. So, talked about all the medicine docs writing all the prescriptions. The surgeons haven't been left out of this, okay? Here's the sign. Dan Pereira lets me use, welcome to Texas, come for the barbecue, stay for the angioplasty, okay? This is 2007 data. It's actually gotten worse since then. We spent over $100 billion killing 27,000 people. I want you to know that stents and bypass surgeries are great for relieving symptoms of angina, but they don't do anything to stabilize the disease. If you want to stabilize the disease, you have to eat right, and if you can't get your cholesterol down below a certain level, you might have to take some cholesterol medicine. But generally speaking, you don't have to do that. So if you look at the P-Day study, which he actually talked about, but I want to talk about a little bit more in detail, 15 to 19, this was a study that was done in people who had died of trauma, homicide, or suicide and were otherwise healthy between the ages of 15 and 35. And they did autopsies on them. They actually looked at their right coronary artery and the aorta, which is that big artery going down the back. And what they found was that at age 15 to 19, everybody had lesions in their aorta, and 7% were raised. Half people had lesions already in their coronary, and 18% were raised. By age 30 to 34, 60% raised, 3/4 people had lesions, and 43% were raised. Now, what you have to remember is that arterial disease is an inflammatory process, and most heart attacks occur in vessels that are less than 50% blocked. So it's not the blockage necessarily that causes the heart attacks. The inflammation in the vessel just ruptures and forms a clot. So to understand arterial disease, we've talked a little bit about cholesterol, which, elevated cholesterol gets into the walls of the artery. Your liver makes all the cholesterol you need, actually. Anything you take in excess to that is probably a problem. You have to understand the nitrous oxide system, and we'll talk briefly about the omega-3s and the omega-6s. This is the study that you saw the slide that Michael threw up real quickly, the pictures. But this is a guy at the Cleveland Clinic. Actually, he was a surgeon, and he didn't have any family history of heart disease. He was not overweight. He was not a smoker. No diabetes or blood pressure. He exercised. He was actually a runner, and his cholesterol looked pretty good. But he developed chest pain, and they actually did an angiogram. You can see the narrow here of his left anterior descending, one of the major arteries that feeds your heart muscles. Now, given the location of that, they would have recommended stent or bypass, but because of the nature of the vessel and its location, they couldn't do either one. So they sent him over to Dr. Esselstyn, who put him on a low-fat, plant-based diet. And he was 2.5 years he was on the diet. He was doing well. See what his cholesterol did? Dropped significantly. But he developed some more chest discomfort. He was under a lot of stress at work. So they figured they better study him again to see if he had heart disease. So here's what they found. Open. His chest pain was not due to heart disease. It was due to either musculoskeletal or maybe esophageal. So back in the early 90s, both Ornish and Esselstyn showed you can reverse, in about a year, increase by about 4% the blockage, decrease by 4% the blockage in the coronary arteries, which for those of you who remember your basic physics, the flow through a pipe is related to the power of 4 of the radius. So a 4% results in a lot more blood flow. So in 1978, Robert Ferrgot, in his lab, they accidentally discovered a smooth muscle relaxing substance. So it relaxed the smooth muscle, and they couldn't figure it out. And the race was on to figure out what this was. And it took about 8 years, and 3 labs working together. But Ferrgot finally proposed that the substance was nitrous oxide. So we had discovered nitrous oxide, and the 3 labs actually shared the 1998 Nobel Prize. So what's nitrous oxide? Well, nitrous oxide is something your body makes from arginine, which is an amino acid in the body. Actually, it can also be made from citrulline, which you find a lot in watermelon, which is why 2 doses of watermelon every day for 3 weeks leads to more firm erections in males. That was a study that is on Michael Greger's site for those of you who might be interested. Nitrous oxide causes vasodilation of your arteries, which means it lowers your blood pressure. It blocks clotting, the platelets that are clotters. It blocks the inflammation, and it blocks the smooth muscle proliferation, which are actually the smooth muscle that are around the arterioles. So it decreases the blockage. So nitrous oxide is a good thing to have. It took them a long time to find it because it doesn't hang around very long. It's a gas, laughing gas, right? I've heard about it. So your body likes to preserve this system, but in the course of your existence, you actually make a substance called ADMA, which blocks the production of nitrous oxide. Your body doesn't like that, so it has developed another mechanism to get rid of this. The trouble is this thing gets messed up by high glucose, insulin-resistant fats in the smoking, infection, cholesterol. All the risk factors are messing this up. That's why all those things increase your risk of heart disease. A new bit of information. Everybody in here has heard about vitamin D, right? Okay. You're all getting your vitamin D levels checked? Fascinating. Recommend Michael Greger's series on vitamin D. I was hoping that I was going to live long enough because I knew the sunlight had to do something for us besides just vitamin D, right? Well, Uvb light, ultraviolet B light, is what creates the vitamin D, which you need. UVA light actually liberates from your skin. Your skin is actually a storage organ for nitrates, nitrites, and nitrososols. It liberates nitrous oxide into your blood. It's a storage for nitrous oxide. So if you're out on a run or riding a bike on a sunny day and you're having a particularly good day, part of it might be you're enjoying yourself and the scenery and stuff like that, but it might be because you've got a healthier nitrous oxide system. You can't get this by taking a vitamin D capsule. The best treatment for vitamin D being low, and what we define as low, that's a fairly long discussion, but the best thing to do is get sunlight in limited amounts. Sources of nitrates in the diet are greens, beets, and carrots. This is not different than nitrosamines. Nitrosamines are those things that form from the nitrates they put in processed meats. And that stuff's a carcinogen. This doesn't have anything to do with that, so I don't want you to get confused. So we now know that the skin serves another purpose, and sunlight can be valuable to us for nitrous oxide. This knowledge about nitrous oxide explains this slide here, also courtesy of Caldwell Esselstyn. This explains why in just 3 weeks of nutritional therapy, 80% of people with angina have their angina go away. So on the left, you see a nuclear medicine scan, and the red and the yellow are blood flow. The red is higher blood flow, yellow is less. See what happens after 3 weeks? See how the red and the yellow have increased? So the blood flow to the heart here, to the heart muscle, is much greater just after 3 weeks of changing your diet. That's not because the blockages have gone away. That takes a year or two for those to go away. That's because the arteries have dilated because the nitrous oxide is so much better. So the nitrous oxide explains this. So getting back to the fats, saturated fats are solid at room temperature. This is all the animal fats and the tropical fats for you coconut lovers out there. I'm not going to dump on raw coconut. I'm just going to talk about coconut oil and palm oil. This raises your cholesterol and your low density. Monosaturated fats are semi-solid, nuts, avocados, olives, and canola oil. They have a minimal effect on your cholesterol. And the polyunsaturated are the things you need, because you can make all the fats your body needs as long as you have omega-3s and omega-6s. Now you need them both. Your body just can't make them. You lack the enzyme. So we have to get into a little biochemistry briefly. You eat these things, the omega-3s and the omega-6, and the omega-6 goes down through an enzyme system and makes some other substances that are inflammatory and cause clots. The omega-3s go through the same enzymes and make anti-inflammatory and anti-clotting stuff. Let me be clear, you need both. The trouble is, historically we were about 2 to 1 or 1 to 1 in our ratio of 6 to 3. Recommendations less than 4 to 1. Meat eaters in this country in one study were 7 to 1. The lacto-vegetarians were 10 to 1, and the vegans were 15 to 1. They were getting too much omega-6. And remember from the slide before, if you've got a lot of omega-6 over here going through this enzyme system, these can't get through here to get here. So the answer is to decrease this, eat correctly. You can take supplemental DHA and EPA, but that doesn't fix the problem if you've got a lot of omega-6s. You've still got a lot of inflammation going on. You got it? So we'll get to the recommendation on that a little later. But bottom line is, you get these. You can get the omega-3s from flaxseed, green leafy vegetables, walnuts, and quite frankly, almost all plant foods have both omega-6s and 3s in them in small amounts. Your body was designed to take care of this problem automatically if you trusted and you eat according to your design, and we're going to close with that design principle. But where you get your omega-6s are poultry, eggs, grains, and most vegetable oils. So where the vegans get a lot of their omega-6s if they're eating corn oil and chips and things like that. That's where that's coming from. And of course, the meat gets a lot because they feed grain to meat. Okay? So that's the. So let's talk about blood pressure real quick. One of the most common arterial diseases, at least that I dealt with. This is very similar to the sugar thing. Systolic and diastolic is considered normal. Here's high blood pressure, but here again it's a spectrum. We're not sure why plant-based diets work. You lower your body rate, decrease your fat intake. All these things have been proposed for mechanisms, but we know it works because if you look at the studies, people who've been plant-based for about 20 years have a much lower blood pressure, 20/10. One study where they actually put people in between 40 and 70 on a plant-based diet for 52 weeks, they lowered it 9/5, but they had also taken 20 of those 26 off all medications and lowered medications in the other 6. So the drop was later than that. This is an interesting slide. We'll talk about it in a minute, but this is a Maybam tribe, which is in Sudan. And you can see they're on a plant-based diet, and their systolic blood pressures basically never change over time. Whereas these people in Wisconsin, even at age 20, have already started to have their blood pressures go up over time. And basically, you've got a pump, which is your heart, and you've got a bunch of pipes. And the way to think about this is if you run the system at a higher pressure, it doesn't last as long. Remember, your heart beats, and the pressure goes up, and then it loads, and it comes back down again, and it goes up, and it goes down. So your systolic pressure is that top number, and your diastolic number is above. The good news is you spend more time loading than firing. So your mean pressure is sort of down toward the bottom one. Exercise is important. Lainey went through all that. Actually, for a blood pressure standpoint, it's the aerobic exercise more than the strengthening. Both of them will reduce body fat. So, the new beliefs for you for arterial disease: inflammation, blockage, it's reversible, early is better, and it's a systemic disease. So I'm going to share with you one of my meals for health patients. This is Ollie.
I started having high blood pressure when I was in my 40s. And since then, it was always high, but as I've gotten older, it was getting higher. And so my doctors were monitoring me. And I had been on that blood pressure medicine for over 22 years. This program done something for me that the medical industry couldn't do for me. This program done something for me in 4 days. 4 days, I was off of my blood pressure medicine. You know, when I started it, and 4 days, we started April the 8th. April the 12th was my doctor's appointment. And I went in there, and she took my blood pressure because it had been running like 160 over 104, and it was going up, and they had upped my medication. And then when I started this vegan program, it went down, it was 123 over 78. And she says, oh, I think that the medicine that the doctor gave you is working. I go like, no. It's the food. And it really was the food, you know. I mean, I've been searching for a long time. I spent a lot of money at the health stores. I really did. Trying to find out what was good for me. I hadn't had pork in like 38 years, but I was still eating chicken and turkey and fish. And I wasn't doing too well. I was spending all this money on noni juice. I was spending money on spirulina, my calcium pills, all this money I was spending. And all I needed to know was that I needed to eat this plant-based, strong, density low diet. It was just so simple. And I'm going like, wow, I didn't have that one puzzle that was missing. And this is it, you know. I don't see myself going back to ever eating the way that I was eating because of the fact that I'm medicine-free right now. And I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I get up in the mornings and I can just leave my house. I don't have to worry about, oh, did I take that blood pressure medicine? No. I'm feeling good right now. I'm feeling really good.
Of course, what she didn't tell you was she also lost 14 pounds in 2.5 months, and her cholesterol dropped 50 points. So when I practice medicine as Meals for Health director, I'm the one who took her off her medication. This is a very rewarding way to practice. So let's go through the lightning round real quick, just hit these diseases. Now that you sort of have a concept for how complicated it can get even for some simple diseases. Let's talk about hearing. Presbycusis, I hate this. It says that means old age, loss of hearing. Well, they went out to look at the Maybam tribe in Sudan. They had no noise exposure, and they're plant-based, and they have very little hearing loss as they get older, compared to a matched group at the Wisconsin State Fair in 1954. This study was actually published in 1960. Obviously, noise exposure is an issue, although I'm not sure that we were getting as much noise exposure back in those days because they hadn't invented the iPhones. You see all these people, running around with all these things plugged in. Harmful, the association with hearing loss is cholesterol and saturated fat, which, remember, from the arterial disease is made into cholesterol. Helpful are the antioxidants and magnesium seem to be, and those are present in plant products. Vision, we talked about diabetic retinopathy. Age-related macular degeneration seems to be associated with the same things as arterial disease. Glaucoma seems to be improved with lutein and zeaxanthin, not the isolated supplements, but the actual greens and stuff have been helpful. Cataracts related to smoking, radiation, and animal products. People who've been on plant-based diet for a period of time have 40% less risk of having cataracts. And just the old age, you get to be 40. When I was 40, my arms were getting too short, and I had to go get glasses, and I've got them right up here with me, and I don't walk around my house without knowing where they are at any one time. It looks like that's related to homocysteine, which is one of the sulfur-based amino acids that's mainly present in animal food. This is the elephant in the room, dementia. Typically, it's Alzheimer's or multi-stroke dementia. We'll talk about that in just a second. But it's horrific cost, but a lot of cost in unpaid care and suffering by caregivers in the home. Most of the dementia is Alzheimer's, and The second category is vascular. Well, we already talked about that, because if you keep your blood pressure down, your cholesterol down, you don't get vascular infarcts in your brain. Parkinson's, associated with dairy consumption and insecticide exposure, small part of dementia, but for the most part it's Alzheimer's. These are the factors that tend to make you more prone to have Alzheimer's disease. There is a gene, but even if you have the maximum genes that lead to Alzheimer's, you will get it less frequently, and it will take longer if you avoid these metals, saturated fat, cholesterol, omega-6, and some drugs will do it. Now, we get a lot of exposure to these things, copper and iron and zinc in multiple vitamins, which is a reason we tell people not to take multiple vitamins. Aluminum, cooking utensils, antiperspirants. Leading source of aluminum in your diet is cheese, actually, if you eat cheese. What reduces the risk for Alzheimer's is maintaining ideal weight. These vitamins in the whole food form, mental exercises, exercise, sleep, and the omega-3s. Dr. Barnard's book out called Power Foods for the Brain is one that I highly recommend. That's a good resource for this. Autoimmune disorders. Basically, you have an immune system in your body so that when you get attacked by something, you can fight it off. Everybody has an innate immune system, but we, as jawed vertebrates, have what's called an adaptive immune system, so that there's a lag time between when you get exposed and you get a response. There's a memory associated, and it's very pathogen and antigen specific. This is why immunizations work. You get exposed to that, and you've got a memory, and if you ever get, if you got tetanus shot and you get exposed to tetanus, your body fights it off. What autoimmune is means it's an inappropriate immune response to normal tissues, so that, let's say you ate some animal thyroid, and it got into your body somehow. It got into your gut, and then your body got into it, it absorbed it, and your body said, well, that's animal thyroid, it's not supposed to be here, and they attacked it. But in the course of attacking the animal thyroid, because that protein looks a little bit like your regular thyroid, it actually destroys your thyroid. So one of the working hypotheses for why so many people have hypothyroidism in this country is because we've all consumed too much animal thyroid. Now, where would you get animal thyroid? Anybody ever eat a hot dog or sausage? What do you think they put in those things? Just about everything, right? So the list of autoimmune conditions is long, and the common mechanism is exposure to animal proteins because they get partially digested into the body, a leaky gut, which is facilitated with animal fat, and endotoxins, which are in the animal products, even if it's well cooked, because the endotoxins are in the bacteria, and even if you kill the bacteria and cook them, the endotoxins still get into your body. 5-GC is an interesting compound. It's a sialic acid metabolite. We are the only mammal that does not make sialic acid. So any other mammal, we ingest sialic acid. It's metabolized to 5-GC. This small gets into your body and lines your joints and your arteries and causes inflammation. It's not uncommon. In my own personal experience is my wife used to wake up with hand aches every morning, like stiffness in her hands. Within 5 or 6 days of going plant-based, it was gone. And it's not unusual for people with arthritis and inflammation and muscle aches to get better within 5 or 6 days. That's probably because the 5-GC is being cleared out of the body. The trick is with the autoimmune disorders is there are some plant triggers sometimes. It's not uncommon when I'm working around the McDougall program to actually find people who say, yeah, I've got rheumatoid arthritis and it's fine except if I eat tomatoes or eggplant, then I get a flare. There are clearly some things like dairy that is particularly bad, so what you need to do is go on the whole food plant-based diet first, avoiding endotoxemia. You'll eliminate all these except chocolate. Chocolate actually has some bacteria associated with it because it ferments it. But then you have to start looking at some of the more common plant triggers and eliminating those if you're still having problems. But the devil's always in the detail because a lot of these faux products like Morningstar actually have egg whites in them and things like that, so you have to read the labels pretty carefully. Weight loss. Obesity is associated with all sorts of things. It's very common. One of my pet peeves is the Bmi Index. We weigh people at Kaiser. I don't know why we do that. We could ask them what their weights are and write it down on the paper, and it'd be 1% accurate. If I wanted to weight, I could have them weight on the way out. But Ansel Keys, who actually popularized it after it invented by Adolphe Quetelet back in 1832, said this should not be used for individuals. It's a population measure. It misses 50% of adult obesity, it misclassifies 30% of men and 12% of women. It's not accurate. So, changing beliefs around fat problems. The government food pyramid must be working. More Americans than ever are looking like pyramids. The key concept you need to know about obesity is calorie density, exercise, and addiction. Those are the three things we'll review real quickly. Jeff Novick was a guy who I know very well now who has a great resource called Calorie Density, How to Eat More, Weigh Less, and Live Longer. It's on his website, Jeff Novick, and it costs you $20. Highly recommend it if you're interested in losing weight. But the basic is vegetables are about 100 calories per pound. All the research, by the way, is in calories per gram, but nobody knows what a gram is in this country. When I was in junior high school, we were supposed to be converting to the metric system, you know. Nixon also declared war on foreign oil, too, so, you know, we're not doing well in a lot of regards. But fruits are about 300, potatoes about 500, legumes, grains are in there. Fatty sources, meats are about 1,000, 1,200, refined carbohydrates are 1,400, junk foods 2,300, nuts and seeds are 2,800, and oils 4,000 calories per pound. So if you look at particular foods, for instance, carrots are up here, apples, although if you dry apples out and take all the water out, they get much more calorie dense. Pasta is very calorie dense when you buy it, but you put it in water, so it becomes a lot less calorie dense. So pasta is actually not that calorie dense. Chicken has a wide range of variability. White flour is down here, here are hamburgers, sugar and cheese are down here, chips and almonds are down here. Why this is important, and just to give you a visual perspective on this, here's 2 chick nuggets and a 1 1/4 cup of low-fat lentil soup, both 100 calories. Which one do you think fills you up more? How about 800 calories? A cup of cashews or 6 medium-sized baked potatoes with salsa? Okay? You eat this, you're not going to get fat. You eat this and you're overweight, you're going to lose weight. And the reason is you will eat to satiety. As an organism, you will eat till you're not hungry. And you're hardwired not to be hungry. We'll get to that in a minute, but there are only 3 species on the planet that have weight problems. Anybody? Humans, dogs, and cats. Actually, I'm going to have to talk to Bob. Where's Bob? We got Daisy looked like she had a little bit of a weight problem, you know? Now, if you take wild dogs, they're thin. But the reason dogs and cats have a weight problem is because they're around humans and we're feeding them animal products. We're feeding them not natural dog and cat food, okay? You can take a wild rat and put them in a cage and feed them wild rat food, they don't get fat, even if you don't give them an exercise wheel. On the other hand, you feed them McDonald's and real high calorically dense food, they will get fat even if they have an exercise wheel in there. So just to give a visual on this is 400 calories of oil in your stomach, 400 calories of chicken, and 400 calories of spinach, eggplant, and beans. Why exercise is important is when you exercise and eat low-fat diets, it increases a hormone called leptin produced by your fat cells. It reduces your appetite and increases your metabolism. On the other hand, if you try a calorie-restricted diet, it decreases your leptin because your body's getting ready to starve, and after several days, it's down to 50%. That increases your appetite and decreases your metabolism. That's not what you want to do. This is why calorie-restricted diets don't work. High protein diets work, paleo, you know, all the stuff that's the rage, Atkins. Those things will have you lose weight, but that's because the high protein load actually gives you nausea and decreases your appetite artificially. Chemotherapy would work the same way. So I haven't seen the chemotherapy diet, although I wouldn't be surprised if it comes around one of these days. Now, what Jeff Novick did that I never saw done before, which was really useful for me as a clinician, is that if you keep your calorie density on average in your foods below 400, you can actually be sedentary and lose fat. This is sort of information I needed when I'd have patients coming to me who had bad arthritis of their knees, and their orthopedic surgeon wouldn't give them a knee replacement until they lost weight, but they couldn't lose weight because they couldn't exercise, right? So, but on the other hand, you can exercise 1.5 hour to 1 hour moderately, and you can tolerate higher calorie density, elite athletes, and if you go, you'll get weight gain regardless of your activity if you go above 1,300. So I'm out on the bike trail riding my trike now, and I see a lot of people out there exercising who think they're fit, and they are doing a good thing out there being exercised, but if they're eating a bad diet, they're not stabilizing their arterial disease, and they're still running risk for the autoimmune disorders. So I have to put in a slide about childhood obesity. I can't control my child's eating anymore because they're in their 30s. Unfortunately, I can't control my grandchildren, 5 with another one on the way. A great job if you can get it. I highly recommend grandparenting for those of you who have had the experience and those of you who haven't. Somebody once told me that being a grandparent is a reward you get for not killing your kids, you know. But childhood obesity problem is not a childhood problem, it's an adult problem. Because children don't decide on menus, shop for food, prepare food, drive themselves, have the ability. So setting a good example is the best teaching. So here's Ruth Buzzkill, the lunch lady. And remember, kids, not only is milk a fattening health hazard, but when you're drinking milk, it means a sad and lonely calf somewhere isn't. So real quickly about addiction, we're going to talk about cheese here real quickly. Overweight is not about weak will, it's about addiction. Just 10 calories per day intake more than you need will be a pound a year. So over 20 or 30 years, you can put on weight very gradually. Genetics play a small role. If you are eating whole foods and you start eating junk foods, you start getting a high from the addiction, then you come back down and you develop tolerance. Just like you jump in a swimming pool, you get used to the temperature of the water. When we take people off their standard American diet, they go through a short withdrawal period, which in my experience up at the McDougall program is about 1 to 2 days. About day 3, they've developed tolerance and they're starting to feel better. You can speed this along with a water fast or a juice fast. The cheese people have these broken up into marketing segments. Cheese cravers put cheese on everything, eat it straight out of the package. Cheese enhancers just put it on their food. Casein, which is the main protein in dairy, is metabolized to 8 different casomorphins in your gut. These are narcotic-like substances. I have patients that can say, "Doc, I can give up the meat, but don't take my cheese away from me." It's about addiction. So let's talk about the belief system, then we'll wrap it up. Beliefs drive our behaviors. Here's a lady who's asking if you would like congealed bovine mammary secretions with that. And so they decided they better invent the word cheese, because who would buy congealed bovine mammary secretions? But information is important to our beliefs. So, you know, if you believe that a food is good for you and necessary, when you go into the store, you're going to shop, cook, and eat in a certain way. But if you get additional information, like if you take one of my granddaughters and you give her 2 glasses of milk, she has 3 times the amount of estrogen that her body normally has in it. And because it's not human estrogen, it doesn't suppress her own production of estrogen. Remember, they've got new and improved dairy cows now that are pregnant 310 days out of the year. So when you get milk at the store, it's high in estrogen, even if they don't add hormones. I have guys drinking milk as a recovery product. If you give a guy 2 glasses of milk, it drops his testosterone 20% and increases his estrogen 26% in 1 to 2 hours. So once you get the information like this, you start to question your belief. And then you find that cheese is the leading source of aluminum in the diet. And if you look at dioxin, which is the most carcinogenic substance known to man, product of burning plastics, the recommended daily safe level is 120 femtograms a day. That's a quadrillionth of a gram. There's 49,000 femtograms in a scoop of Haagen-Dazs ice cream, 105,000 in a Pizza Hut pizza slice. The half-life is 1 to 6 years in your body. This stuff hangs around for a long time because of the way it was engineered. We haven't seen it before. So here's a guy who didn't listen to his wife. I warned you about the hormones and all that meat and dairy you eat. So if I can change your belief that if you think food is good for you, and then you think it's not good for you, and then you think it's harmful for you, and then you think it's harmful, addictive, and contains poisons, next time you go to the store, you may shop differently. So the only diet that works is the ad libitum diet. Eat when you're hungry, because that's what you're wired to do. You just eat the right food. This is an Hawaiian study. They took 22 adults for 21 days. They were on the typical American diet. They put them on a high carbohydrate, complex carbohydrate, mainly taro and sweet potatoes. They ate until they were no longer hungry, and their calorie intake for the day dropped almost 1,000 calories. And they ate when they were hungry. This is the ad libitum diet. their blood pressure went down, their cholesterols went down, their triglycerides get down, their fasting sugars went from pre-diabetic on average to normal. Okay, so got to start eating out of a different parking lot. You got to change your environment. Here's the skinny pigeon talking to the fat pigeon, right? See what he's munching on? Remember, potatoes were really low fat. But if you take a great potato and you cut it up in little pieces and you drop it into a deep fryer with oil, which is 4,000 calories per hand, you've got a different food on your hands, okay? So we talked about that. Now I want to let you hear from Kimberly, another one of my patients from Meals for Health. One more comment, slide out of order. Support is important. PCRM did a Geico study, and this is Bruce and Hillary at the beginning of the study. And they went into Geico and they actually gave them weekly classes about plant-based eating, and they put some plant-based stuff on the menu for Geico for lunch. Unfortunately, their first menu item was like a vegan burger with cheese, so it took them a couple times to actually get the details worked out. But this is Hillary and Bruce 1 year later after they finished their half marathon. They had lost each almost 100 pounds in a year, which is basically what we find. About a half pound to 2 pounds per week is realistic. So here's Kimberly.
I was healthy on paper, and I thought, I was living my life, but I wasn't. I thought I knew how to eat healthy. I've had the same doctor my entire adult life. I've been a member of Kaiser since 1976. I knew what it was to eat healthy. Oh, eat this, don't eat that, eat this, don't eat that, cut your calories, da-da-da-da-da. It didn't work. I had IBS every day, multiple times a day for, God, don't want to cry again, for my daughter's entire life. 3 days after changing what I eat, I've not had IBS. And that's been almost 3 months now. I don't have migraines anymore. I have fibromyalgia, but I'm almost not going to claim that anymore because I feel so much healthier. I have so much more energy. I'm so excited. I've lost over 40 pounds in 2.5 months. I thought that I knew what it was to be healthy. I thought I was stuck in the life that I had, having fibromyalgia and just existing. I am so grateful to everyone here that started this program because I have a life now. I can live and enjoy my life and spend time with my kids and not just sleep all day long. And I never would have been able to experience any of that if it wasn't for EarthSave and Meals for Health.
We're out of time, so we're going to wrap up here real quickly. Just leave you with one last belief system. Humans are hindgut fermenters. We're designed as herbivores. There's nothing about our anatomy that puts us in the omnivore camp. We basically have a colon that actually is capable, because of our bacteria, to digest fiber. And if we eat according to our design, which is a non-GMO, whole food, plant-based diet with vitamin B12 supplementation, fitness, and we keep current, then we will do well. So here's the last cartoon: heart attack with extra cheese, heart attack with bacon, double bypass. So it's up to us individually what we eat, basically. But hopefully today's talk is giving you some different change. The only supplement you need is vitamin B12. It's not the beta-carotene, it's the carrot. Fitness is not only aerobic strength and flexibility, but it also is balance and stability. For those of us that are a little older, we know that balance and stability are important. I've hoped today's presentation, I don't know where you were on this spectrum, whether you had never heard of a plant-based diet. Most of the people in this audience have. But I've hoped I've moved you along further down this pathway to your healthy. And these are some of the resources that are really valuable to me. I'm going to leave this slide up if it's okay. And like I said before, you got to start eating off a different parking lot. So thanks for your time.
I'll be right down here. Attention for just a minute. We're going to be transforming this room into a dining hall. We're behind time, so I need help with everybody. We have a number of volunteers. I can use some more.
Does he use any medical plan?
You want my email?
Does Dr. McDougall use any medical plan to cover expenses for
No,
people?
people pay fee for service.
Okay, how much would, let's say, a typical treatment cost me?
What's that?
How much would a typical treatment cost me if I came there?
All he does is a 10-day program for like $5,000.
That's cheap.
And you live there for 10 days. And he's your doctor.
You stay there for 10 days.
Yes,
From what I
at
understand.
the Flamingo Resort.
Oh, yeah, because his office, from what I understand, is right next to a hospital.
His office is in the Flamingo Resort.
And the Flamingo Resort.